You are my biggest failure. That was how my father started his retirement speech. He didn't say it in private. He said it into a microphone, standing on a stage at the Ritz-Carlton, broadcasting to 300 shareholders and a global live stream. He smiled, a shark in a $3,000 tuxedo, and delivered the killing blow. Tonight, I leave my entire $150 million empire to the only child who matters. My son, Brandon. As for you, Abigail, you are fired. You are disowned. You are erased. Security, remove her. My brother Brandon smirked, preening like a peacock as he grabbed the keys to the kingdom. The crowd didn't gasp. They laughed. They watched the guards step toward me, waiting for the tears, waiting for the begging. But I didn't beg. I didn't even blink. I just checked my watch. 8:02. Right on schedule. If your own father tried to erase you for a laugh, would you walk away? Or would you burn the building down? Tell me in the comments. I walked toward the microphone. The two security guards hesitated, looking at Charles for confirmation. My father gave a dismissive wave of his hand, his smirk widening. He wanted this. He wanted the audience to hear my voice crack. He wanted the shareholders to see the emotional daughter beg for a second chance. He wanted a show, so I gave him one. I took the mic from the stand. The metal was cool against my palm. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked directly at Charles. "Thank you," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It echoed through the ballroom, clear and sharp as cut glass. Charles blinked. The smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the script. "Thank you for firing me publicly," I continued, my tone conversational, like we were discussing a merger over lunch. "Because under federal law, a retaliatory termination in front of witnesses immediately triggers the protections of the Whistleblower Act. I don't need a severance package, Dad. You just gave me immunity." A murmur rippled through the front row. The lawyers in the room sat up straighter. They knew what that meant. Charles's eyes narrowed. He took a step toward me, but I was already moving. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the red envelope. It wasn't a prop. It was the only thing I had brought with me tonight. I didn't fumble with the seal. I ripped it open in one clean motion and pulled out a single heavy document. "Project this, please," I said to the tech team in the back. I held the document up to the camera lens, broadcasting to the giant screen behind me. The image flickered, then sharpened into focus. It was a transfer of control agreement. The signatures at the bottom were magnified to 10 feet tall. Charles Parker. Brandon Parker. Dated today. Time stamped 1 minute ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, turning to the confused crowd. "This document confirms that as of 8 o'clock, Charles has transferred 100% of his assets, his CEO title, and full legal liability for the Parker Corporation, to my brother, Brandon." I turned to Brandon. He was clutching the crystal trophy Charles had just given him, looking between me and the screen with the dull confusion of a man who has never read a contract in his life. "Congratulations, little brother," I said, and for the first time, I let a genuine smile touch my lips. "You wanted the crown? You have it. The jets, the mansions, the accounts. It is all legally, irrevocably yours." The room erupted in applause. They thought this was a concession speech. They thought I was bowing out with grace, handing the torch to the golden heir. They clapped for the unity of the Parker family. But Charles wasn't clapping. He was staring at the screen, and the blood was draining from his face. He knew me. He knew I didn't give gifts. I gave verdicts. I leaned into the mic for the final word. "I'm not losing this company, Dad. I'm giving it away." Charles's laughter was a bark, sharp and violent. It echoed through the silenced ballroom, jarring against the polite society backdrop. "She forged it," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "That document is a fake. She stole that laptop. She is committing corporate espionage right now." He didn't wait for the crowd to decide who to believe. He signaled the men standing by the emergency exits. These weren't hotel staff. They were private contractors. Big men in dark suits who moved with the predatory speed of people paid to hurt others. 3 of them rushed the stage. I didn't have time to run. One of them grabbed my arm, his grip bruisingly tight, twisting it behind my back until I gasped. Another slapped the microphone from my hand. It hit the floor with a screech of feedback that made the shareholders cover their ears. "Lock the doors!" Charles screamed, his voice cracking. "Nobody leaves. This woman is mentally unstable and dangerous. Call the police commissioner. Tell him I want her in a cell tonight." The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed shut with a definitive thud. The click of the magnetic locks engaging was audible even over the rising panic of the crowd. "Please remain calm," Charles said, smoothing his jacket, trying to regain control of the narrative. "My daughter has a history of episodes. We are handling this internally. I looked out at the sea of faces. 300 of the city's most powerful people, and not one of them moved to help me. They watched with morbid fascination, like drivers slowing down to stare at a car wreck. My mother, Susan, was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, accepting comfort from her friends, playing the role of the grieving mother to perfection. My laptop was still connected to the projector. The guard who had twisted my arm saw it. He raised his boot and stomped down hard. Plastic crunched. The screen behind me flickered and went black. There, Charles sneered, stepping into my personal space. No more lies. My arm throbbed. The guard's grip was cutting off my circulation. I was trapped, disarmed, and surrounded by people who believed I was crazy. But Charles had made one critical mistake. He thought destroying the laptop destroyed the evidence. He didn't know the files weren't on the hard drive. They were already in the cloud, and he had just locked himself in a room with the only person who knew the combination to the safe. The guard's thumb dug into the soft tissue of my arm, grinding against the bone. The pain was sharp, immediate, and grounding. But it wasn't what hurt the most. 10 feet away, my mother, Susan, finally stood up. She smoothed the skirt of her Chanel dress and walked toward the stage. For a heartbeat, a foolish, childish part of me thought she was coming to stop this. To tell her husband that assaulting their daughter in front of 300 people was a line too far. She walked right past me. She didn't even blink. She went straight to Brandon, cooing over him, checking his suit for lint, whispering comforts to the 30-year-old man who had just been handed a kingdom he couldn't spell. I wasn't the black sheep of this family. That would have implied they noticed me enough to dislike me. I was the glass child. Transparent. Fragile. Something you look through to see the golden object behind it. For 29 years, I had been the utility. The fixer. The one who existed only when something was broken. I remembered the night Brandon crashed his Porsche into a parked car after a frat party. Dad didn't call the police. He called me. I was 22, studying for the bar exam. I drove out in the rain, handled the tow truck, paid off the owner of the other car with cash Dad provided, and drove Brandon home while he vomited in my passenger seat. Dad never thanked me. He just asked if the press knew. I remembered the tax audit of 2018. Charles was in a panic, sweating through his silk sheets. He needed someone to structure the offshore accounts in the Caymans so the IRS wouldn't look too closely. He didn't hire an external firm. He used me. Abigail is good with details, he'd said to Mom over dinner. As if I were a useful appliance he'd bought on sale. They thought I was cleaning their messes because I was desperate for their love. They thought my silence was loyalty. They thought that because they couldn't see me, I couldn't see them. But that was their fatal error. Because I was invisible, they never lowered their voices around me. They discussed the bribes, the shell companies, and the falsified earnings reports while I was in the room, pouring their wine and organizing their files. They treated me like furniture, forgetting that furniture has no allegiance. I looked at my mother, fawning over the son who had never worked a day in his life. The sadness that used to choke me, the desperate need to be seen evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't the victim here. I was the witness. And I had been taking notes for a very, very long time. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the noise of the panic. I yanked my arm, not enough to break free, but enough to make the guards stumble. I locked eyes with Brandon. "Did you read the indemnity clause, brother? Or were you too busy admiring your new title?" Brandon blinked, the haze of adrenaline and ego momentarily clearing. He looked down at the crystal trophy in his hands, then back at me. For the first time all night, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a child who had wandered into the middle of a highway. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. I wrenched my arm again, forcing the guard to readjust his grip. I didn't care about the pain. I needed Brandon to hear this. I needed the room to hear this. "Think, Brandon," I shouted, my voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "Since when does Charles Parker give up power? Since when does he share the spotlight? He has spent 30 years micromanaging the coffee budget, and you think he just woke up this morning and decided to hand you an unqualified, unilateral transfer of total control?" Charles lunged forward, his face a mask of purple rage. "Shut her up!" he screamed at the guards. "Gag her if you have to." But the guards hesitated. The crowd was watching. Phones were recording. The violence of the moment had shifted from necessary security to assault, and even hired muscle has a limit when there are 300 witnesses. I used that second of hesitation to drive the dagger home. "He didn't give you a promotion, Brandon. He gave you a glass cliff." I turned to the audience, locking eyes with the CFO in the third row. He looked pale. He knew. "The Parker Corporation isn't solvent," I announced, my voice steady and lethal. "We aren't sitting on 150 million in assets. We are drowning in 200 million in debt. The quarterly earnings report is due tomorrow morning. And when those numbers hit Wall Street, This stock is going to zero. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen right out of the ballroom. That transfer isn't a gift, I said, looking back at my brother. It's a liability shield. Dad didn't want to be the CEO when the market opens tomorrow. He needed a patsy. He needed someone stupid enough to sign their name on the dotted line without reading the fine print. He needed you. Brandon looked at Charles. The adoration was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickly horror. Dad? He whispered. Is that true? Charles didn't answer him. He didn't even look at him. He looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat radiating from a furnace. He stepped past Brandon, raised his hand, and struck me across the face. The sound was a crack, loud and sharp like a pistol shot. My head snapped back. I tasted copper. The room went dead silent. Charles stood over me, his chest heaving, his hand raised to strike again. But he had just made his second fatal mistake. He thought violence would assert his dominance. He didn't realize he had just confirmed everything I said. A man who is retiring in peace doesn't hit his daughter in front of his shareholders. A man who is terrified does. I spit blood onto the polished floor and looked up at him. I smiled. You shouldn't have done that, Charles, I whispered. Now nobody is looking at the door. Charles wiped his hand on a silk handkerchief, casually cleaning my blood from his knuckles. He didn't look like a man who had just assaulted his daughter. He looked like a CEO handling an unruly employee. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice smooth, practicing the lie in real time. I apologize for this display. As I said, Abigail has a history of instability, violent outbursts, delusions of persecution. He reached into his inner jacket pocket. For a second, the guards tensed, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed at the edges. Old. This is a durable medical power of attorney, he said, holding it up like a holy relic. Abigail signed this when she was 18, granting me full authority over her medical decisions in the event of a psychological crisis. And I am declaring a crisis. I stared at the paper. I remembered the day I signed it. I was a freshman in college, terrified, sitting in his study while he lectured me about family loyalty and protecting the Parker name. He told me it was standard procedure for the trust. He told me if I didn't sign, I couldn't go to law school. I signed it then because I was a child who thought love was something you could earn with obedience. I signed it because I was weak. But Charles forgot one thing. I hadn't revoked it. Not because I forgot, but because I knew he would use it. A trap only works if the animal walks into it willingly. She is a danger to herself and others, Charles proclaimed, gesturing to the shattered laptop and the stunned crowd. I am authorizing an immediate psychiatric hold. A low wail started in the distance, rising quickly to a scream. Sirens, not one or two. A fleet. The sound vibrated through the floorboards of the ballroom, rattling the crystal glasses on the tables. Blue and red lights flashed against the high windows, turning the diamond ballroom into a strobe-lit nightmare. Finally, Charles muttered. He looked at the guards. Open the doors. The magnetic locks disengaged with a heavy clack. The double doors burst open. A dozen uniformed officers marched in, boots striking marble in perfect sync. The crowd split instantly. Charles straightened his tie, calm returning to his face. He recognized the uniforms. He funded their galas. In his mind, this was his cavalry. He pointed at me. She's having a psychotic episode. Restrain her and take her to Street Jude's. The officers ignored him and advanced toward the stage. I stood bruised and shaken, exactly as he described me. The room watched with pity and disgust. Charles leaned in, smiling. You're nothing, Abigail. And now you disappear. He opened his arms to the officers. She's all yours. They didn't stop. They passed me. They stopped in front of Brandon. Brandon Parker, the lead officer said. Hands behind your back. The cuffs snapped shut as Brandon screamed. He was under arrest for securities, fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying federal filings. Charles froze. You're making a mistake. He's only been CEO for minutes. That's enough, I said calmly. The CEO is strictly liable. I took the microphone. By signing the papers, Brandon inherited the title and the crimes. $200 million in missing pension funds. Fraudulent filings. Full responsibility. Brandon sobbed. Charles backed toward the exit. The head of security blocked the door and flashed a DOJ badge. The FBI had been recording Charles for months, including his plan to frame his son. Charles didn't collapse. He raged, screaming orders at a world that no longer obeyed him as they dragged him away. The ballroom went silent. I dropped the microphone and walked out. Outside, I bought a $2 coffee and stood in the cold night air. I was disowned, unemployed, and headed for court. But for the first time in my life, the ledger was balanced. I wasn't the heir. I was free.